Welcome to the Justice in Heels podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Hayward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for season 4 of the podcast. This season will focus on compliance-related topics, and the goal is to simplify compliance for business owners. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Justice in Heels podcast. Today I have advocate Hanlie van Vuuren joining me. Hanlie, welcome to the podcast.
Good day, Daniel. Glad to be here.
Can you maybe for our listeners that don't know you, just introduce yourself? What are you passionate about?
I worked for 20 years for a trade union, and I did especially compensation for occupational injuries and diseases. I studied my LLB while working and obtained DT29, and then went on and did a master's, LLM, in compensation law. That I obtained in 2013. No, I'm talking nonsense. In 2014, I was admitted as an advocate in 2013 to the High Court. I only recently joined private practice, and I'm a referral advocate. My interest still remains with people who sustained occupational injuries and who was diagnosed with occupational diseases. And the reason for that is that those people are so vulnerable. They are prone to destitute. If they don't get the right proper medical care, the future of their career future are often cut short, and they end up living a life of destitution. It's a dire situation to see how they lose everything: their ability to work, their self-confidence, their physical health, their mental health, everything often is lost in the process, and it's not necessary. So yeah, employers often also falls victim to the system and struggle to register, to do what they need to do, to have the best option for the employees. Our law, the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act, comes from the 1941 Act, the Workmen's Compensation Act. And that act was based on the Canadian province of Ontario. It was practically the same act that was brought over and promulgated in South Africa.
Fantastic. Okay, so you've given us now like a really good background of I'm just going to call it COIDA. I'm not going to pronounce the whole long name the entire time, just for efficiency. So can you maybe just tell us what are the key obligations that employers have under this act?
Okay. Employers have to register with the fund. They need to submit annual return of earnings for the assessments. They need to pay the assessments. They have to keep records of everything that they submit. They have to keep an incident record. An incident record is something else than an accident record. Incident also records all exposures. They need to keep the fund or the forum where they are registered updated with their details. They need to report occupational injuries or diseases as it happens. They need to keep record of that, of all medical reports that they receive, and they need to pay compensation for temporary total disablement when their workers are off duty for the first 3 months. And just something that's not in COIDA, but in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, is that an employer is not allowed to deduct sick leave in state. The Basic Conditions of Employment Act actually excludes leave that falls under COIDA from sick leave.
That's interesting. Thank you for actually sharing that little tip with us as well, because I think that's also something that a lot of people do, and they may not know that it's illegal or not allowed, and they still do, or they know and they still do it. So I think it's really important that you did mention it. Can you now just explain to us what is the correct procedure that an employer can follow to get registered at the compensation fund?
Okay. You can make use of the online facilities of the Department of Labour and the Compensation Fund, or it can still be done. Not everybody have access to internet facilities, and if an employer chooses to do it still manually, my advice would be that you take all of your documents, copies thereof, and when you submit it, get a proof of submission, duly stamped and dated by the Compensation Fund. If you want to do the online option, you go to the website of Department of Labour and register on their website to make use of their entities. You will see that there are a number of entities: the Unemployment Insurance Fund, the Employment Equity Commission, and the Compensation Fund, for instance. And then you choose the Compensation Fund and follow the prompts for the CompEasy system. And register there. But it's important that you have all of the documents ready that you would use for a manual submission, for instance. Your registration form, completed, duly signed, dated. Make sure that everything is there that needs to be there. Incidentally, the number of that form is the WAS2, and the one for injuries is the WCL2. So it's not to be confused. The WAS2 is the one for the registration of employers. Now, you need to have a full description of the company, the owners, the partners, the trustees, the CIPC documents. If it's an NGO, the certificate therefore. All of the people that are the employers and the owners, copies of their identity documents that are clearly legible. You know, it doesn't help to send a thing that's only confusing. The identity numbers must be clearly legible. The registered name of the company and the trading name of the company. Copies of all those documents. Now, it needs to be registered, a company, within 7 days from the date that the first employee is employed. Now, you may get a situation where a company wants to tender. And often for a tender, you need to submit a letter of good standing with the compensation fund. And now you haven't been registered because you have never employed a person in that company. In that case, you can apply or request the compensation fund to provide you with a letter that states that you haven't had the need to be registered up until then. And but then the moment that you employ a person, you need to do that within 7 days with the fund. The physical address, the magisterial district, each and every little detail, postal address, etc., needs to be properly indicated on all of the forms. Now, something that's quite important is the nature of the business. The reason for that is that each type of business or operation or activity carries a certain risk profile with it. Mining is a lot dangerous, more dangerous, and the chances of harm is a lot greater, for instance, in mining, than you would get in an office. Nursing facilities have a different risk profile. Transport have a different risk profile. So the actions should be described very clearly in the nature of the business. If you're looking, for instance, you are involved in construction, state the specific type of construction. The agents that the workers will be work with. In mining, you have, for instance, silica dust that can be inhaled. Leather, steel, wood, each and every agent has a different harm or risk that can bring harm to a person. Of course, it's only applicable to employers and businesses in South Africa. Because jurisdiction is an issue. For instance, I have encountered it in the past that you will have a company with its offices in Mauritius or Madagascar, and come to South Africa, advertise here, have the interviews here in Joburg, and appoint the people to go and work elsewhere in Africa. South Africa does not have jurisdiction. Those employers do not need to register with the fund. It's only for an employer that is an employer in South Africa doing business here, and that needs to be registered. Yeah. The state is also included in the definition of an employer, but the state obviously do not pay assessments to itself. It's a self-insured employer.
Interesting. So I just also want to add onto
a
what you
labor
actually...
broker is also an employer for the purposes of...
Fantastic. So I just want to add to what you already said in terms of registration and how you need to be very clear with your description of what the employer actually does. So I actually stepped into one of those traps where I just said construction, and then they sent it back and they said, no, you need to specify what type of construction this company actually does. So yeah, I can appreciate what you said. It's very important. And just a practical tip for our listeners, if you send in your compensation fund registration and via email, because maybe you can't register online, please call the compensation fund and ask them to check that all of your documents are correct if you sent it in via email. And then ask them to escalate your matter so you can get an escalation code so that you can actually escalate the matter and you can keep on phoning to follow up on where your matter is. Is it registered yet? Is it not registered yet? Yeah, I think it just creates a little bit more certainty.
If you send it in via email, make print screens of each and every email that you sent and keep copies of that as well. If you may end up finding out that it landed in a dungeon.
Yep.
So email registrations, I personally would prefer doing it manually rather than by email. Either online through the system and CompEasy or manually in its totality, because they can't query a stamp from themselves.
Yep, definitely. So, Haneli, if I can then just ask you, what penalties can companies then get if they don't comply with all of these provisions, like getting registered and filing their return of earnings, all of that, those responsibilities that they have under the Act?
Okay. Penalty 10% of up to 10% of the actual or estimated value of the assessment.
Sure.
So if the assessment is not, or your estimation, when you register, you send in an estimation. Thereafter, annually, you are supposed to submit a return of earnings. The return of earnings works like the financial year of SARS. It ends on the end of February. You send in all of your documentation at the beginning of March. By end of March, or when you get your statement back, you have to pay within 30 days. If you do or fail to do that, the penalty can be up to 10% of the assessment fee. But in all instances, you can make representations to the Compensation Commissioner. This flows from the history of compensation. Prior to compensation law, an employee needs to take his employer to court. He had to sue for damages. And at that stage, there was no apportionment. So it was lose or win. Mostly employees did not win their cases. So they were left destitute, society suffered, people did not get medical treatment. And when an employee did win, or a number of employees, when there were a huge accident, for instance, where a number of employees were involved, it could cost the employer solvency. So that's not in the interest of society, it's not in the interest of business, it's not in the interest of workers. And therefore, there was this process of embarking on compensation laws. And the benefit for employers is that they are covered. You cannot sue your employer. Section 35 forbids it. But in exchange for that, the employee gets his compensation. Now, to prevent insolvency from employers due to penalties, etc., employers are also, it's open to them to make representations to the fund. Also, something that I haven't seen employers make use of is the right to object to a decision of the Compensation Commissioner. And or to take them to the High Court to make use of the right to review in terms of PAJA. A penalty can also be given to employers if they fail to report an accident or an occupational disease, and that may attract a fine of the full value of that claim, including the medical costs. And then also, if an employer fails to pay compensation for temporary total disablement during the first 3 months that an employee is booked off duty. So it can be a heavy penalty. It can be a lot of money. If I may, I would like to talk a little bit about domestic workers.
Yes, please.
Prior or in 1941, the Workmen's Compensation Act excludes employees in domestic service. And there was then a case whereby a lady, a matron of a hostel, burned very badly. And she applied for compensation. And it was declined because the court said she did domestic service when she was preparing food. After that, the act was amended, and then it said a domestic worker in a private household is excluded from the definition of an employee. So in 2020, I just want to see exactly the case number. Yeah. In 2020, Mahlangu and another versus the Minister of Labour and others was heard by the Constitutional Court. And the Constitutional Court held that the exclusion of domestic workers is unconstitutional in South Africa. And so they are not as yet included in the definition, but by the working of that court case. Now, there is an amended law, the COIDA Amendment Act of 2022, has been signed by the President, but the date that it comes into operation has not yet been published in the Gazette. But in the meantime, it is expected from employers of domestic workers to register with the Compensation Fund and to submit the necessary documentation. I thought that the calculation of the assessment for a domestic worker is maybe something that we can look into, because it also is the same formula used for everybody else. Now, annually, the Compensation Fund or the Minister of Labour publishes in the Government Gazette certain amounts, minimum and maximum amount of earnings. A compensation falls then between that bandwidth and the assessments as well. Now, currently, from the 1st of April, the minimum assessment is 88,688 rand per annum. Now, the formula is the earnings of the employee, and maybe I should explain what earnings is. Earnings is not salary. Earnings are all regular income that the employee receives. It includes bonuses, it includes everything that's paid on a monthly basis, except, for instance, pension benefits and medical aid contributions. But it includes the value of food and the value of housing, etc. If a person receives a 13th check or an annual bonus, that's also regular income. It must be included in that calculation. So the formula is this, total of the employee's earnings divided by 100 times the assessment tariff. So say the employee earns 1,000 rand a month, for instance, a domestic worker, then you will say 1,000 rand divided by 100 times, and the tariff for domestic workers that was published is 1 rand and 4 cents. So times 1 rand and 4 cents, that gives you 10 rand 40. For each 1,000 rand of earnings that the employee earns per annum. Now, because that's way below the minimum, when you take that into account, it's then 88,688 rand divided by 100 times 1 rand and 4 cents. That gives you 922 rand and 36 cents per annum. I had the question posed to me previously that employers of domestic workers in the past sometimes have a funeral policy for their workers or other insurance products, and whether that should then be stopped in favor of the compensation that can be obtained through COIDA. And my advice is that's not the right thing to do. Keep that benefit in place. It is there. And register with the compensation fund. There's protection for you therein. And if your worker sustains an injury on duty in your home or on your premises out of and in the course of her duties, or occupational disease, they work with chemicals. Household products have a lot of high-risk chemicals sometimes. If they contract an occupational disease, then they are covered and you are covered as an employer.
That is actually very fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I think I think a lot of the people listening are actually employers of domestic workers, or they may be domestic workers. So that will definitely help as well. My next question to you is, what is the exact timeline for reporting any injuries?
The timelines for reporting, you have to differentiate between occupational injuries and occupational diseases. It is similar that an employer does not have a choice. You are obliged to report all occupational injuries. The moment that the person needs medical treatment, you have to report it. That is true for injuries as well as occupational diseases. The timelines differ and the process differ a little bit. Occupational injuries needs to be reported by or on behalf of the employee as soon as possible. Sometimes the employee can't talk. He may be unconscious, he may have died, but the employer is obliged to report it the moment that he takes notice, that he is informed by whoever that his employee was injured. He then has 7 days, but the sooner the better, because the person may immediately need medical attention. The notification regarding injuries by the employee on his behalf can be verbally. But if it's an occupational disease, it needs to be in writing. The employee or someone on his behalf need to inform the employer that he contracted an occupational disease, that it is considered to have been arose out of and in the course of the employment, and that he expects the employer to report it to the fund. Now, something that hasn't been mentioned earlier is that we have 3 funds in South Africa. In 1894, the Rand Mutual Assurance Association was established by mining companies. And in 1934, the Federated Mutual Employers Association by the employers in the construction industry. Now, both of them are part of the Act. And in the Amendment Act, it will be opened up to other people, also licensees. But the rules remain the same. The report needs to go to that insurance company within 7 days if it's an injury, and within 14 days if it's an occupational disease. Now, why I want to mention the other 2 is because I often encounter that workers do not know of the other 2, and they are not always sure where their claims have been reported. And they would come and say that their claims has not been reported. But if you inquire more, you will find that they only inquired at the Department of Labour's Compensation Fund and not with, for instance, Rand Mutual or the FEM. Rand Mutual covers mining as well as the iron and steel industry. The iron and steel industry was added to their portfolio in 2015. So it is also furthermore the right of the employer to express his opinion. He may be of the opinion that the employee was injured at home, or he didn't expose him to whatever agent the employee says that made him sick. The employer is within his right to express that, but he still remains under the obligation to report it. The Compensation Fund or RMA or FEM is an independent adjudicator in the case, and they have investigative powers, so they can investigate the case to establish whether it's a valid claim or not.
All right. So then what are the main benefits that one can claim from the compensation fund, and who can actually claim this benefits?
Claimants are employees in the mine, or their dependents when they died on duty or due to an occupational disease. Benefits, the most important benefit of it all that lies at the heart of the Act is medical costs. Nothing is unlimited, of course. So it's reasonable medical expenditures within the discretion of the Compensation Commissioner or the forum, such as Rand Mutual or FEP. And it is limited to a maximum period of 2 years from the date of the accident. Now, often a condition does not need 2 years treatment. After 12 months, or even shorter. The moment that the doctor says that the patient has reached the maximum medical improvement, then he issues a final medical report. That final medical report will close the file, close the claim, and upon receiving the final medical report, the compensation fund will determine the degree of permanent disablement, if any. During the period of treatment, if the worker is booked off, he is also entitled to compensation for temporary disablement. Whether it is a total disablement or partial, he is entitled. That first 3 months that I earlier referred to, that the employer is obliged to pay, that is paid back by the compensation fund to the employer. Now, what I often find is that employers say, I'm not obliged to pay any longer after the 3 months. I cannot afford it, so I'm not going to continue paying. And then the employee interprets that as a instruction to return to work. And that is not the case. The employer needs to explain properly to the employee that he will assist the team to claim the compensation directly, the fund or the RMA or FEM, and that he only needs to come back to work when the medical practitioner says he is fit to do so. Now, another benefit is compensation for permanent disablement. There are 2 categories. The Act says that permanent disablement between 1% and 30% will be paid in a lump sum. Above 30%, so from 31 to 100%, is paid as a monthly pension for the lifetime of the employee. So there is another claim that can be instituted. I'm not sure, the signal seemed as if it dipped for a moment. Okay. The other claim that I would like to bring to people's attention is a claim for increased compensation due to the negligence of the employer. Our compensation system is a no fault. Neither the fault of the employer or the employee plays a role in a valid claim. But what do an employee do when his exposure was negligent? The employer knew he could provide a mask and he did not, for instance. Or he knew of a patent defect in machinery and he did not fix it. So what can the employee do? He can institute a claim for negligence in terms of Section 56 of COIDA. That claim is quite technical in nature. It needs to be instituted within 2 years from the date of the accident. And there is another 12 months provided for condonation. But it should not be forced to be heard before the tribunal or finalized before compensation for permanent disablement is finalized. If it's done, there's nothing that can be increased because it's only compensation for permanent disablement that can be increased. And I refer to the technical nature. Our courts has said that the words due to means that the employer needs to be 100% negligent. If the employee was partly negligent, the claim fails. And then it also refers to compensation, increased compensation. And therefore, it does not refer to damages. So the Apportionment of Damages Act is not applicable. It is quite a hefty compensation or hefty liability in the end for employers for negligent exposure of their employees. And it will increase assessments. It will raise the risk profile of the employer. But the compensation is, again, that increased compensation is also paid by the fund. And it's paid in a lump sum. And it can be quite a substantial amount of money. But it is important that employees who wish to follow that route get legal advice to do that. The process is similar to a civil action. It is also pleadings that are exchanged and within specified time limitations according to the Compensations Commissioner's rules. There are a set of rules that was published in the Government Gazette many years back.
Thank you so much for that. That's unfortunately all we have time for today. But I think we must definitely have a second session because I think there's a lot more that you can actually teach our listeners on compensation and also on COIDA. So thank you so much for joining me. Where can our listeners reach you?
They are most welcome to contact me via my email address. I'm a referral advocate, so I do not take work directly from the public, but I'm open to give advice. My email address is adv.hanlie, Hanlie, atlantic.net. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Justice in Heels podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it with your friends on social media and tag us. As this podcast has a legal element, just a quick disclaimer that all views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the views of the firms, companies, or brands that we are associated with. Until next time, goodbye.